every day about what's happening with criminal justice reform, but you don't hear much about civil justice reform. All you hear is the political rhetoric about tort reform, which I tell you is untruthful. The facts do not back up the statements of those who are promoting them. And we've learned through media that if you tell a lie enough, people will start believing it. And we've seen that happen in politics in America. But there are some people that are standing up. There are some people that are speaking out. And today, as a guest, I'm going to introduce you to one of the finest trial lawyers in America who speaks to conservatives around America as to why we should stand on our Seventh Amendment and not let civil justice be removed from the citizens of America, because the jury system is the only true democracy we have left. So I welcome our guest, Paul Byrd from Little Rock, Arkansas. Hey, Paul, how you doing?
Thank you, Hunter. Proud to be here.
Tell the audience about your background.
Well, I grew up in Arkansas in a small town. My family was from rural roots. My mom and my dad were both from farming families. And my dad had an extreme work ethic. He fought in the Pacific on the USS Harold C. Thomas. When he came back, he went to law school on the GI Bill. And he taught me the value of our American Constitution, our Arkansas State Constitution, and how the two work together. And many nights by the fireplace where he would explain to me his view of what a jury trial meant to the people, how a jury was made up of our peers, but that a jury was the equalizer and the leveler of our society that kept people being sovereign. And it's that history and that background that kind of carries me through even to today.
Well, Paul, I'm so glad to have you on the program today. And you know that standing for justice is what you do so well publicly and around this country. And I was taken back when I saw your presentation on how to talk to conservatives in America. So often, and you can tell me whether I'm wrong or not, that there's such a distortion about trial lawyers and what they believe and don't believe and how they're against conservative values. You stand for just the opposite of that, cliche.
There's no doubt. When a trial lawyer takes his client to court, he's telling that jury that his client's life is sacred and precious. And he's telling that jury that someone has done something wrong, that there's a right and a wrong, and that the wrong ought to be remedied, and that people ought to be responsible. And that is the heart of the value system that I grew up in, that you grew up in, that their life is sacred, there's a moral right and wrong, and people should be responsible.
I'm fascinated by your strategy on the way you educate people on the importance of the Seventh Amendment. Why don't you give the audience a little bit of history of where the Seventh Amendment fits into the Bill of Rights, because they've heard a lot over the weeks about the First Amendment and the protection of our religious freedom. Tell them about the Seventh Amendment.
The Seventh Amendment, that's why I wear this lapel, that 7 stands for the Seventh Amendment, is the right to a civil jury trial, and it's in our Bill of Rights. And what I always tell people is that if you want to enforce your First Amendment rights or your Second Amendment rights, where are you going to go to enforce them? You better have a courtroom that you can go to and have the right to a trial. So the Seventh Amendment was one of the Bill of Rights that our founding fathers insisted on being in the Bill of Rights. If you don't have a healthy right to a civil trial, you have 4 choices in our society. You can have a healthy civil jury trial, or if that is gone, then justice is going to demand that we increase more regulations. More government regulations are going to come down the pike. because that is an answer to dealing with what normally a jury trial situation would take care of. If we don't have more government regulation, we're also going to risk another factor that seems to be coming more and more into play, is the criminalizing of negligent behavior. You make a mistake. In the old days, you made a mistake, people could get a healthy sense of justice from a jury and a civil trial. Now they tend to want to criminalize that behavior, and all of a sudden you're going to jail because you made a mistake. And then lastly, if you don't have any of those remedies, people turn back to the streets and vigilante justice, which is what our civil justice system was really the foundation for, was to prevent people just taking the law into their own hands.
You know, we have seen this tort reform propaganda go around America over the last 15 or 20 years of our careers, and we've seen the untruths told. I know last year in Arkansas, y'all had a constitutional amendment that was going on to the ballot sheet of the state of Arkansas. I would call a referendum for the public to vote on, right, to cap all damages at $500,000.
That's exactly
Tell the
right.
audience why that is so unconscionable and so ridiculous.
You know, I was asked one time in a legislative hearing what would be the effect of a damage cap on non-economic damages. And I told them, I said, well, what you're saying is that if my wife was injured and died as a result of a drunk driver, then she would die instantly and therefore have no medical bills. She had no economic loss there. She was a stay-at-home mother and had no economic history, so there's no lost wages to recover. The only thing that you can recover for my wife is the pain and suffering and mental anguish that her family, her children, me, missed about her, and it's capped. It was going to be capped at $500,000. I said, but take another woman that made a different choice and had a long-term career, and she made $100,000 a year. Then the jury gets to consider that, and it's unlimited. They can go back and give her lost wages all the way to the time of retirement. So essentially what you're talking about is a stay-at-home mom who has no economic losses, has no value in front of when a drunk driver runs over her. Whereas a woman that had a long career, she could have lost wages and have economic losses. It's just deciding what do you value in society when you take Ken Connor, my buddy Ken Connor always says, what would you rather have? Would you rather have a jury of your peers, people taken from the community, who got to hear all the evidence, and after having heard all the evidence, decided what the value of your wife's life was worth? Or would you rather have bureaucrats from Washington, D.C. or your state capital, having not heard any of the evidence, give an artificial cap to what the value of my stay-at-home wife is worth? And that's what I explained to that senator that asked me that question at a legislative hearing. I said, surely you're not going to tell me that the policy in the state of Arkansas is that a stay-at-home mom has less value in society than working mothers or other people.
Yeah. And you often forget that when you're looking at economic damages too, and you take a 40-year-old woman making $100,000 a year, they're going to project the present value of future income of $100,000, and they will tack on the growth rate of that money. They will take it out to the age of in the late 60s or 70 when she would have worked. Right. And you're looking at a multi-seven-figure number that the jury gets to consider for that economic, well, they don't consider anything for the stay-at-home mom. And you're talking about real disproportionate numbers.
Just unbelievable showing what our value is. I mean,
Yeah.
Your laws reflect your values. I'm always asked, what are non-economic damages? I think we often We've watched too many TV shows where somebody was trying to fake an injury and they try to talk about, oh, my neck hurts, and well, that's not real. Well, I always try to think of an example of, like, let's take a white-collar worker that is educated, has a good job, and a drunk driver runs over them, and in the midst of the accident, they lose both their legs. Let's take that white-collar worker loses both of his legs. It's going to take about 4 months of rehab to get him to where he can learn how to get himself in and out of a wheelchair. He's going to spend $30,000 or $40,000 in medical to heal up the injury from losing both his legs. And then he's going to get in that wheelchair and roll right back under that desk at that white-collar job and start working for the next 30 years. Well, your economic losses in that situation is your $40,000 in medical bills that you were out, 4 months of lost wages for learning how to get in and out of a wheelchair. Your non-economic losses are living without legs for the next 30 years of your life. So I try to tell people, which is more real to you? That $40,000 in medical and 4 months of lost wages, or living without your legs for 40 years of your life? Non-economic damages are real.
Yeah.
They're real, and a jury gets to consider that when they hear all the evidence and all the facts. And they should not have some kind of artificial cap where they can't give more than what the facts would allow under the current circumstances.
And and we call non-economic damages general damages, which involve past, present, and future physical and mental pain and suffering and disfigurement. And somebody who's had both legs cut off, somebody who's a paraplegic, somebody that's a quadriplegic, somebody that's been burned with third-degree burns over their body. You can never rationalize capping damages at $500,000, $1 million, or any number. That's why the jury should hear all the evidence and hear the witnesses, and not some bureaucrat, whether congressional or state, make that decision.
The other thing about it, and I tell people this all the time, you know, my brother-in-law is a retired federal judge, and he was a PhD in political philosophy. He was appointed to the federal courts by George W. Bush. Smart guy. And he told me one time that, you know, that our property rights are essential to us. Well, the reason our property rights are essential is the government can come take your printing presses, and you don't have freedom of speech. You don't have the freedom of the press. If they can come take your church house and your pews, you don't have a place to go to church. So your freedom of religion can be affected. So property rights are essential. And I bring that point up because this is where the right to a jury trial is so essential. It's not only the government that can come take your property and take away your ability to speak out, but it could be a very powerful political opponent, someone you spoke out against who has more money than you. If they can afford to hurt you, if they can afford to take your property, then it's just like a big government coming in and taking away your rights. It's just like Russia, communism coming in and just taking away your right to have private property and stand on your own street corner and sit in your own house and speak your mind. We've lived under this umbrella of freedom from the right to a civil jury trial that we just don't realize how it permeates all the way through the freedoms that we enjoy every day. Once that right is gone, then the rich and powerful can hurt you, hurt your family, take away your property, destroy your property, and all of a sudden you're just as imprisoned and having no voice to speak as if it was a communist government.
I know that many of the states, Arkansas and I think Alabama and Texas and others have incorporated the Seventh Amendment into their constitutions. I know Louisiana has not. And there are other states that have not.
Colorado.
Colorado has not.
Yeah.
Do you recommend that all states should incorporate the Seventh Amendment, and why?
Definitely. And it's not just my recommendation. It comes from James Madison in the Federalist Papers. If you look at Federalist Paper 51, he said that America is a compound republic. And he's talking about the compound republic is a federal constitution and a state constitution. And what Madison said was that the two republics, with their rights of separation of powers, will keep us having a double security of our freedoms.
I agree. They all should incorporate it, and we should follow exactly what James Madison said in the Federalist Papers.
The Arkansas Constitution has the wording, "The right to a jury trial shall remain inviolate." And I often say, go read your Bill of Rights or your Declaration of Rights in your own state constitution, because it's really the Bill of Rights on steroids.
Yeah.
The state constitution even gives you more powerful language than is even in the United States Constitution. 38 states have the language, "The right to a jury trial shall remain inviolate." All states but Louisiana and Colorado have some language similar. New Jersey, on July the 2nd, 1776, put the right to a jury trial into their constitution. Virginia had the right to a jury trial in its constitution 5 days before the Declaration of Independence was even signed. And what they said was, the right to a jury, this ancient right of trial by jury, ought to be held sacred. And that was 5 days before the Declaration of Independence was written. And if you remember, one of the things that they wrote in the Declaration of Independence that England had taken away from them was the right to a jury trial.
Right.
So the right to a jury trial is so important, and what scares me is that we kind of live in a day where people take it for granted. I was listening to a radio program one day, and a gentleman was explaining why the Second Amendment was outdated and antiquated. And he said, so many of the Bill of Rights are antiquated, is what the speaker said. And somebody said, well, which one would you recommend is really antiquated? He said, well, let me give you an example. The Third Amendment. The Third Amendment to the Bill of Rights is antiquated. It's not relevant anymore. And I sat there and thought, this is the Bill of Rights that says the government can't force us to house soldiers in our house, which was one of the things that was going on during England times. And I thought, this speaker has lived under this umbrella of that freedom from that Third Amendment that he thinks it doesn't apply anymore. But I guarantee you, he has no imagination to realize that once that protection is gone, can you imagine the government deciding it could save money on military bases by just forcing into all of our homes that we have to house soldiers?
Yes,
they could take over entire suburbs.
Oh, yes.
But that was the mentality that's also going into the right to a jury trial. You've just lived under the freedom that it gives you. You sit in your own living room and you can speak your mind. You can go out on the street corner and you can speak your mind. But you can't do that if the rich and powerful or the government can just come and freely take away your property, your family's health, any kind of injury to you or your family. But they can't afford to do that in our world because we've had the right to a jury trial. We've had that freedom and that protection, and we go to sleep with it at night and don't realize that it's there. And then to watch people want to whittle it away, take it away, cap damages to where the rich and powerful can afford to hurt you and take your property.
You know, the conservative and the family value man that you are, and the man of faith that loves the Lord that you do, you believe that the Seventh Amendment is really a protector of life. It's as much pro-life as we discuss in the First Amendment, and my understanding, and I've made that analogy myself when I was trying to campaign and lobby against a bill that Congress put out on the floor 3 years ago that was going to cap medical negligence and pharmaceutical liability and nursing home negligence and medical device negligence at $250,000. And I simply did a focus group in my office, and many of the women of faith in this office said, you know, I would never put $250,000 on a life, because we know there was drugs that got out on the market. One of them, I believe, is Yaz. It was alleged to have made women infertile.
Right.
So who's going to give up the right to have a child or to put a value on that right at $250,000? And that's what that part of the American environment that we call the fiscal conservatives only, that are only interested in their pocketbooks, were willing to get through and to the American public. And of course, when Congress passes a bill that regulates the health, safety, and welfare of the nation, they preempt all state law. I mean, you understand that the doctrine of preemption can be used as a weapon to stop civil justice and the use of the Seventh Amendment. So I look back at that scenario and I think about, they're really putting a value on life. What is your take on that?
Well, one of the things I was proudest of in our battle against issue 1, which was trying to cap damages on a jury trial and place the value of a life at $500,000, was that our leaders in the pro-life movement in the state of Arkansas wrote letters to the editor, went around the state making speeches talking about how this is immoral. It's placing a value, an artificial value on life. Worse than that, it's placing a government-mandated price on life that was not contemplated by James Madison and those forefathers that wrote the Constitution. It just wasn't in the cards. They would be rolling over in their grave to hear that that's what we were trying to do. Because once you take away the right of a jury to award a remedy, you've taken away the right to a jury trial in the same breath.
In addition to equating it to the life issue, it's also really just extreme bureaucracy. It's extreme federalism, I would say. It's just denying the states the rights to regulate things that states have regulated since the beginning of the 13 ratifications of the Constitution.
Exactly. You know, that's what Madison said. Again, I refer back to him talking about it being a double security. We've got the rights guaranteed in the United States Constitution and the rights guaranteed in our own state constitutions. And Madison said they would be a double security. When Congress can pass something and the courts claim that they preempted the field, that is just federalism on steroids. It is taking states' rights and throwing it out the window. It was that double compound republic of America that Madison relied on that's going to help keep us all safe and free. But when they can come in and preempt something and there's no remedy under the law, then we're back to what I was saying. The rich and the powerful can afford to harm you and hurt you and have no consequences. And that's what the whole idea of a right to a jury trial was about.
When you talk to conservatives about civil justice, and you have these 3 circles that you show, and at the very top you have fiscal, F-I-S-C-A-L, conservatives, right, and the one on the right you have family value conservatives. The bottom left you have libertarians.
That's right.
Explain to the audience why you use that and what you know to be facts from election results, history, and evidence throughout this country.
The physical conservative up at the top of the Venn diagram believes in spending wisely. For heaven's sake, don't spend more than you make. Having been very involved in the pro-life movement, I've always realized that the family value center of that Venn diagram has 3 core values. Life is sacred, there's a moral right and wrong, and people should be responsible. That's just a core value of the family value circle. Over here on the libertarian circle, it's property rights, freedom from government intrusion, smaller government, less taxes. That's important value. So I put it in a Venn diagram because I can sometimes place a conservative that I'm talking to, maybe they're a little more libertarian leaning, or maybe they're a little more family value leaning, or maybe they're up in the physical conservative. I make it a Venn diagram because I kind of fit in all three circles. I'm a physical conservative, I'm a family value conservative, and I'm a libertarian by upbringing. I bring it by upbringing, the Scots-Irish background. You and I have talked about this before. And the Scots-Irish generation helped the English fight against the Irish. But when they finally won all the battles, the English, the rich and the privileged, didn't give them the rights that they wanted. Started telling them where they could go to church and things like that. So those Scots-Irish people, who were my forefathers, they got redneck mad. And they left and immigrated away from Ireland and came over into the Appalachian area, Pennsylvania and on down in America. So the Scots-Irish got up in the hills. The English people that kind of took after the Romans, that built their house on squares and they built their government from the top down, they kind of lived on the coast. But the Scotch-Irish people lived up in the mountains and the hills, and they had a very libertarian bent, a very strong libertarian background. They believed in property rights, they believed in small government, they believed in low taxes, they believed in being independent. One of the things that the Scottish and the Scots-Irish history was that power corrupts. And history and culture, and the Scots-Irish culture taught them that you can't trust the rich and the powerful and a centralized government, because that would take your freedoms away. And so that's where we are today. We have this shared common value among us.
There's so many injustices today, particularly what we're seeing in civil justice, which is kind of being masked because it's always great for the news to talk about criminal justice, but when you take those property rights away from people, which is, the right to go to court is a property right, the right to own property, the right to have access is a right. Those are the things that are been sequentially being removed, but for the fact people like you are standing up and educating people, because this presentation that you've made today and to this audience is incredible. Yeah. You started off by your presentation today that civil justice is about giving a remedy for a wrong. And so, if I'm not mistaken, you often speak about the fact, who is going to be accountable? Are you going to make the victim of an accident accountable for something he didn't or she didn't cause? Or are you going to make the manufacturer or the other driver or the other insurance company or the other chemical company that put the poison on them accountable? And if that's not happened, who's going to be accountable? The government or the state. It's going to be Medicaid, it's going to be Medicare, it's going to be some government program that has to pick up, which ultimately is the taxpayer. Am I right on that, Paul?
That's exactly right.
And so we're just about people that believe in accountability, and the only way to make that happen is to make sure the real democracy are those 12 people in state court, or those 6 or 8 people in federal court who represent the community, the peers of those who are here, and to hear that evidence and make that decision. I know I'm making your closing argument for you.
You are. You're doing better than me.
But it's a fact, and that's why you and I agree. And I can't really thank you enough for being on the show today and sharing this, because it's such an incredible history lesson. And if you take the electoral vote, which people can access, what took place in 2012, I'm sure it's almost identical in 2016, except for a few counties. In 2016, the southern Florida counties changed. Some counties in Pennsylvania changed. And that's why we have a Trump in the White House instead of a Clinton in the White House. But in 2012, we ended up with another term of Obama instead of a Romney. But you look at those voting districts, and they're pretty close except for a few. I suspect in 2020 we'll read the same way, but your pattern of the Irish and the hardworking people, the libertarians, the ones who believe in their constitutional rights, kind of fit the pattern of the vote. Am I wrong on this?
No, that's exactly right.
I'm watching it. So I'm not trying to be political. I'm just trying to illustrate, and you're not trying to be political, because I know that you're a caucus chair for the American Association of Justice, which is the best trial bar in America. And so you speak to everybody, and I speak to everybody. It's about justice. And so I thank you for coming here today and sharing what you do. Tell the audience how they can reach you if they want to talk to you more about this, or if they need your help. Would you tell how you can be reached?
You bet. I'm in Little Rock, Arkansas. You can look me up on paulbyrdlawfirm.com. My email address is paul@paulbyrdlawfirm.com. And my office number is 501-420-3050. I'd be glad to visit anytime about justice. I've always told you that civil law is what I call pro-life law. There's no greater example of how our society values life than in a wrongful death statute in your state. And if that gets taken away, there's no protection.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Paul.
you. Appreciate it.
God bless you.
Thank you, Hunter.